Oh, that was an inconspicuous start. Hello and welcome to the 37th Annual Fletcher Lecture at Nicholls State University. I'm Todd Kennedy, Chair of the Committee, and I would like to welcome you all here and thank you for coming out. I'm going to be relatively brief because we have three different people introducing different things, so we want to actually get to the speaker at some point tonight. But I do want to quickly first talk about two awards that we're giving out tonight to two very distinguished students. The first is the Linda Stenga Award for Excellence in Literary Studies. It's a mouthful, but the student's very worthy of it. It's the second year we've given this out. It's a permanent award that is funded by a private donor. And this year's recipient is Mark Hugh, who's here tonight. The other award is the first of a 2-year award that's being funded in memory of the deceased Noel Tubes, who was an original member of this committee as well. And tonight's recipient is currently stuck in a traffic jam in downtown Thibodeau and is quickly freaking out and sending texts to her friends. It's going to be okay. But Laura Breath will be here later, and we can all tell Laura how great she is later. But congratulations to Laura Breath for the Noel Tubes Award. And on that note, Ms. Diane Fletcher.
Good evening. Before I begin my address, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the recent passing of Mrs. Rebecca LeBlanc, known to us and to many as Becky. A dear friend and former colleague who worked many years in the English Minor Languages and Cultural Studies Department here at Nicholls. And while here, she served many years on the Fletcher Committee and often hosted Fletcher events at her home. We all have heard the saying, to know him is to love him. And in this case, to know her is to love her. For her wittiness, her immeasurable kindness, her enthusiasm for teaching, and for being on committees. And her deep, abiding love for her husband, children, grandchildren, and close friends. And if you met her, or even worked with her, you would never forget her. There is this gospel song entitled, You Know My Name. And the lyrics are in reference to God, of course. But had you met Becky, you would undoubtedly know her name. And I can't sing, so I'm just going to read the chorus. You know my name, you know my name, you know my name, you know my name. Oh, how you comfort me, oh, how you counsel me. And it still amazes me that I'm your friend. She was not just a friend, but an asset to the community, to this committee, to the department, and to this university. And everywhere she has tread, she has left her footprint. She's truly missed. And so we extend our condolences to her family and close friends. And I ask you to please bow your heads and say a silent prayer in her honor. Thank you. So welcome, everyone. On behalf of the Fletcher Lecture Committee and the Department of English, Modern Languages, and Cultural Studies, I welcome you to the 37th Annual Lecture. We're delighted to have you here this evening. The series began in 1985 as a memorial to Dr. Marie Fletcher, Professor Emeritus of English, who died in 1983. Dr. Fletcher was highly respected here at Nichols among faculty and with her students. She was a member of many professional organizations, namely the Thibodeau Literary Club, Louisiana Folklore Society, Friends of the Library, United Methodist Women, Delta Zeta Sorority, Sigma Tau Delta, Delta Kappa Gamma, the American Association of University Women, Phi Kappa Phi Honor Society, and of course, a charter member of the Nichols State University faculty. She was also a faculty advisor to Alpha Lambda Delta, a freshman honor society. Her interest in literature led her to found Pencil Tracks, the first literary magazine at Nichols. Above all, she was an extraordinarily compassionate English teacher and department head. And these memberships and her accomplishments make her something of an icon, someone special, admirable, and that admiration inspired friends and colleagues and students to want to do something to honor her memory. The original committee considered naming a building after her or establishing a scholarship in her name. They eventually settled on creating this lecture series because the series best reflects her spirit as a teacher, best reflects her love for scholarship and learning, and best reflects her deep and sincere love for American literature and Southern culture. So through donations from Nichols alumni, former students, and several benefit fundraisers, more specifically a chef's benefit, and the first featuring Chef Paul Proudhon, who died in 2015. And the committee was able to raise money to host the series, which you can see is still ongoing. And over the years, this lecture series has featured renowned writers, poets, critics, film writers. Figures such as Ernest Gaines, Lee Smith, H.J. Kennedy, Donald Stanford, Robert Ken Warren, who taught her, and his wife, and Warren was the first lecturer, and his wife Eleanor Clark, Cleon Brooks, Maxine Hong Kingston, Ellen Gilchrist, and many others have graced us with their presence in the name of this little lady taught at this little well-known university on the bayou in southern Louisiana, and whose ordinariness promulgated this event that has brought out and still brings out many notables. And so in keeping with the spirit of the event, I'll now leave you to Dr. Shauna Walton, who is, in her own right, is an inspirational teacher and well-known professor in the English department here, and will introduce the guest speaker this evening. Thank you, Dr. Walton.
Hi, everybody. If you haven't had a chance to notice, there are alligator barb scale earrings up here for sale, and I highly recommend them. I'm pushing earrings. Okay, and welcome all to join us here in November, the month of gratitude and harvesting. You're so welcome, and tonight we are grateful to welcome to our stage a native of the Bayou region, Monique Verdin, who is an artist, photographer, filmmaker, author, activist, citizen of the United Congregation. And as we welcome her during this Native American Heritage Month, I hope all of y'all are aware of that, I'd like us to take 1 second to pause to recognize that our beloved university sits on land that was occupied and beloved by indigenous peoples long before we were here. The Chitimacha, the Homa, the Biloxi, the Chawasha, the Washa, and many other groups whose names we can no longer call out loud or who are left off this list. I also want us to stop and recognize that the buildings that we work and study in are built on top of former plantation land in a region where thousands were enslaved to build wealth for others. And I think it's important and appropriate that we call forth all our ancestors right now and hold them close to us, because we're in precarious times. All our ancestors from all backgrounds, we need them. Our future is at risk, and a land is slipping away with every storm. Houses are quite flat. We know this. We know that people fish where they once grazed cattle. We know that where people once farmed, there's now ghost trees. We need hope, and we need ideas. And Ms. Verdin comes to us with what I see as one roadmap for how we work together and think about these problems. In this, how we can engage with this vulnerable, uncertain world in which the relationships between environment, culture, and climate are complexly, can't even speak, woven into the economics, occupation, history, and politics. How do you pull on a strand and untangle it? And Ms. Verdin's answer that I found in her work is that you don't untangle it. You see it in all its complexity. We see this in her film. If you haven't seen it, run out and watch it right now. My Louisiana love. No, not right now. But she sort of looks squarely and lovingly, sort of unflinchingly at her community, the Homa, dealing with ongoing crises, the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, all on generations of forced adaptation. Ms. Verdin's work has been exhibited across the US and internationally at too many places to mention. I told her I couldn't even get them all down on a page. She's held multiple fellowships, including multiple artist residencies at the collective group Studio in the Woods. And y'all also, if you're not been there, not right now. Most recently, she served as part of the Big River Continuum, and that was a creative artist swap between the source, people at the source of the Mississippi and people at the mouth of the Mississippi. And swapping ideas about those 2 points, the mouth of the Mississippi, Monique has called the PowerPoint. I just love us imagining it as the PowerPoint, both for the things that we see and what we can build. Her art has called her to action, and her art is a form of action. She's the director of the Land Memory and Seed Exchange and part of Another Gulf is Possible collaborative. She's one of the co-leaders. She's in a circle of brown, indigenous, Latinx, and Desi women from Texas to Florida, working to envision how to rethink our economies, our communities, and how to build sustainable ecologies. In 2020, she published when the rest of us were trying to make sourdough, she published Return to Yamashita. And in that title, she reclaims native words to describe the land between the Mississippi River and the Atchafalaya Basin. Or the Atchafalaya River, which we think is. This important collaborative project, to me, I hope you all get a chance to see it. I hope it's for sale out there. This is collaborative and deeply complex. She's tracing her family's home migrations, and I hope we're going to hear some more about that. But this collaborative project offers sort of a through line for all of her work to me. She's weaving together stories of how her ancestors survived, thrived, devastating, tumultuous change, and how they continue into today. Whatever governmental projects or local actions come, there is, she shows us, a Louisiana lost and a Louisiana left. And that people have before and will again have to redefine the meaning of home. Her work offers us a way to think about change and adaptation, helping to envision how we can work together to create a solid future on shifting land. Please welcome Ms. Monique Verdin.
Hello, good evening. Thank you all for being here. It's always weird when you hear somebody talking about you. Like, whoa, okay, yeah, you've been watching me. I'm gonna move around a little bit. I had volunteers to be clickers, but I'm gonna try to manage myself tonight. And just recognizing that we all come from lineages and are tied to lineages, sometimes lineages that we don't even recognize or know that we're tied to. And so just incredibly grateful to Nichols for inviting me here, and grateful for Miss Becky and Miss Fletcher for paving the path for me to stand here and be with all of you today. And I too am super grateful for all of my ancestors and your ancestors that have made it possible for us to be in this space here together. And you know, this is the time of ancestors with all the goldenrod blooming, and the season of Halloween and All Souls and All Saints. And been thinking a lot about, you know, those who have passed on. And I shared this photograph a lot since I first started ever doing public speaking or talking about the home realities that I've witnessed and captured over the years. This has been my anchor, and it really is the photograph that I was educated on where I come from by my grandmother, who would pull out this photo and share it with me as a child, and I was fascinated to hear these stories. And my two great grandmothers are standing in the front line here, Celestine and White, and then Ernestine is holding the baby on the other side, and these are other family members. And this image was taken in the late 1920s down by Pointe-aux-Chenes or Pointe-aux-Chenes, depending on who you ask, whether it was Point of the Oaks or Point of the Dog. And that's Celestine's house, and I just always like to point out the mud and moss chimney and the palmetto roof, and to think that that really was 100 years ago, and how much things have changed so quickly, and how much has kind of remained the same. So I get overexcited with bringing slides sometimes. And so I'll click fast and then I'll just leave it up from time to time, since we're doing this dance tonight. But just to orient ourselves, And some of you may know that land acknowledgements have become very common these days, which 5 years ago that wasn't the case, which is really awesome, and also complicated at times in that, we acknowledge that we're on the lands of indigenous peoples, and also recognizing that that land has been stolen, and also in many cases, that there's been great wealth that has been taken from that land over the years in different ways. And I have been called to the Mississippi River in this way, but I think, of course, we're all kind of, if you're drinking water from this place out of your tap, you're Mississippi too, like we're all Mississippi, which is kind of cool to think about. If we identify it as like where our water source came from, how different that would be than like our neighborhood. So I've been thinking about that a lot. And when I was up in the north part of the river, in February, it was frozen, and I watched it melt over the course of just like a week. All of a sudden, it just broke up, and there was this real familiarity, even though it was in a different form. While I was there, and the Mississippi's been connecting me to all kinds of beautiful people, and I've been learning a lot. And also, I think that, we have so many challenges here, but if we were really educated on the dynamics of the Delta from when we were little, how our understanding and how our actions and our decisions might be really different in this time. I work a lot with this map maker, Jacob Rosenzweig, so you'll see, this is one of his maps, there's more. I'm not a PC person. So I try not to be too doom and gloom, because I've really been trying to lean more into future spaces lately and solutions. But this is another image of something that has been kind of a foundational motivator, which was learning about the pits in Grand Bois, which are just south of here. And Yakinishido means big country, so this territory between the Mississippi and the Atchafalaya, which, as we've all heard many times, South Louisiana is losing land at one of the fastest rates on the planet. Every 90 to 100 minutes, a football field is lost from our shores. Those are pretty horrifying statistics. But on top of that, our coastline is pockmarked with these kind of waste pits, which is what Grand Bois is and what this is. So oil field waste that's considered hazardous offshore changes hands to a vessel that is registered by the state of Louisiana, and then it's automatically considered non-hazardous with hazardous characteristics, and it's taken to places like this facility where it's treated. And so in the late 90s, I was 18 years old, graduating from high school, and I learned about my cousins who lived like less than, now 1,500 feet, or I think the barrier buffer might be 2,000 feet, but still it's right here. And this non-hazardous waste coming across state lines to be non-hazardous and then dumped into this community, which is in a flood zone. So South Louisiana is losing land at one of the fastest rates on the planet, and Yakinishido is losing land at the fastest rate in all of South Louisiana. These pits, some of them have been closed, but this is pretty much current day. And there's also these injection wells that are there, which are confusing and complicated. I feel really like there's been a lot of thinking about women, women who are educators and women who are kind and good listeners and funny storytellers, I would imagine too, some of them. This is my grandmother. And when when Return to Yakinishido, our book came out, I never got to really have a book reading, so I'm hoping you guys will maybe. Unceded territory. After the Louisiana Purchase transferred control of the area from the French to the United States, tribes in Louisiana did not sign treaties with the federal government. The Couteaus, Migos, Verdins, and other families who were given Spanish land grants were able to hold on to their homeland as individuals, but did not collectively bargain. As Louisiana changed from a territory to a state, Indian identities were erased in census records by Americans obsessed with race. With Indian people classified first as people of color and later as Black, tribal identities were not acknowledged. In the 1830s, the Federal Indian Removal Act mandated that southeastern tribes east of the Mississippi River be removed to Indian country. New Orleans was a stop on the Trail of Tears. Without a political tribal identity, indigenous people in Louisiana were not forced to move. Nonetheless, the Removal Act emboldened settlers to take more land. When the Haitian Revolution collapsed, the sugar industry in the French colony of Saint-Domingue, white settlers from all over the U.S. began sugarcane plantations farmed by slave labor in South Louisiana. Facing displacement, many Homa families began to move south to the ends of Bayou Terrebonne, Lafourche, Dularge, Grand Caillou, Petit Caillou, and Pontchartrain. They also lived out on Ile de Jean Charles and on Pont Barré. In 1829, the city of Homa built their first courthouse where the Homa's last village once stood along Bayou Cane. When people tell me they had never made a connection between the tribe and the city, I'm always shocked by the colonial amnesia. After kicking us off the high ground, they named their town after us and conveniently forgot we existed. The wetlands, unwanted by plantation owners, became our refuge. In 1849, the U.S. Congress passed an act to aid the state of Louisiana in draining the swamplands therein, which transferred federal land that had been part of the commons to the state. The goal was to generate income from the sale of land to develop drainage infrastructure and levees to protect sugar production. After the Civil War, Homa families sometimes worked as sharecroppers on these plantations during the harvest season, but then went back to making a living on the water. Other families didn't have the same mobility. In 1887, 10,000 white and Black sharecroppers from St. Mary and Lafourche parishes went on strike for better wages. In retaliation, white militias attacked them. Black workers were forced off plantations, and an estimated 300 were wounded, killed, or went missing. In Thibodeau, reports of white paramilitaries killing people in the Black community ranged from 35 to 50, with bodies found in shallow graves around the town. No one was ever charged. Throughout the 20th century, justice in Terrebonne continued to be an ongoing struggle that was often thwarted by powerful men. U.S. Senator Allen J. Allender was born on a sugarcane plantation in Montague to an Acadian French-speaking family. In his free time, he collected Indian artifacts. In Congress, he actively blocked civil rights legislation. In 1938, he filibustered a federal anti-lynching bill brought up after two Black men, Roosevelt Towns and Robert McDaniels, were chained to trees, tortured with blowtorches, shot, and set on fire by a white mob in Duck Hill, Mississippi. Making his opposition to the bill clear, Senator Allender declared on the floor of Congress, "We shall at all costs preserve the white supremacy of America." Back in Terrebonne Parish, the district court had created an at-large voting system that maintained this supremacy. Throughout the 20th century, organizing efforts by people of color to secure greater representation failed because they did not have individual voting districts. The issue of the 32nd District Court became extremely important around land disputes that developed when fur trappers and then oil and gas companies began moving into the area. My elders have told me stories of businessmen coming down the bayou to their isolated communities, promising financial benefits for leasing their lands. They were tricked into signing X's on contracts they could not read in exchange for $20 in eviction notices. When they could not obtain a signature, companies turned to archaic laws that prevented bastards from inheriting property, as well as using unpaid taxes to confiscate land. Mateen's beginnings. My grandmother grew up on the Terrebonne Parish side of Bayou Fortune. Her best friend, Jean Verdin, lived on the east side, claimed by Lafourche Parish. I never heard Jean speak anything but Homo French, except for once when I perked up and realized she had said ice cream in English. As young girls, Mateen and Jean played in the prairie, rode calves, and trapped on their own. Imagine two little Homo girls carrying big sticks to knock out the animals caught in their traps. Mateen told me once they were confronted by an older white man who told them to get off his land. They brandished the stick, yelling, "This is our land." I cheered. He chased him away. Mateen shook her head, but we didn't keep him away. When she was 18, she began a family with Jean's older brother, Toussaint Verdin. When I asked about how they got together, she said he wouldn't leave me alone. She told me, "I know what love is, but I don't know what being in love is." She married him because she knew he was going to be a hard worker. Their first son, Xavier, was born in August of 1934, but they didn't legally marry until the 1940s when they had their third child. Mateen got her birth certificate in the 1950s. In the summer, they were shrimping, drying shrimp, and fishing for a living. They also sharecropped on sugarcane plantations like Hope Farm that was just above Cornishan. In the winter, they went to St. Bernard Parish, 60 miles away, and trapped for large landowners near Bayou Terrebonne. Once the corridor of some of the most wealthy sugarcane plantations in the region, they arrived right after the Isleno struggle to hold onto the commons, which became known locally as the Trappers' War. Thanks for letting me read that. The photograph that I started with, was like my education really started at Mateen's kitchen table. And I had a chance to speak with students today who were, we just had Q&A, and I got stuck in traffic too. It was because of the sugar cane coming out of the fields, and there was some, traffic, which I'm sure you guys have all been experiencing on 308. But they don't grow sugar cane in St. Bernard Parish anymore. We do have some pretty big oil refineries that sit there. I always think about how where plantations once sat, petrochemical plants now sit, or prisons in St. Bernard Parish. That's what lines our banks. And my grandparents, they went to St. Bernard for a better life. They were able to find work. They were able to buy land. Their children were allowed to go to school because the state, everybody in South Louisiana is kind of brown, and the closer you get to New Orleans, the more diversity is. They were outside of Terrebonne, Lafourche Parish, where everybody knows if you're a Verdin or you're Homa or indigenous. But really, my journey, it's funny to not know what to call yourself, and to be somebody who's kind of sometimes like I feel a little like obsessed. I get like a little obsessive in the work and go down these deep wormholes. And I think that this image is kind of a new representation of my understanding and trying to layer time and place. I've been taking these United States Geological Survey maps. It's all in the public domain, so you can find them pretty easily. So I've been layering maps from, most are from like the 1930s, with maps from the 2000s. And, of course, where there was like a little squiggly before is now just considered open water. And where my grandmother was picking pecans as a child, my cousins now set their crab traps. And so this is Ponoshin, the banks of Ponoshin, the ghost forest there, and then this 1930 map and the 2000 map to have kind of an artifact of time and place. And it's been a really interesting exercise for me. Some of these maps are from a that I did for some specific sites and the history of sites, and then also like what is in the public record, and what is it that's getting invisibilized is something that I've been questioning. And I had no idea that this place, Jack Point, was actually where they were gonna put where the city of New Orleans is now. And of course, this being also, not as, not exactly like New Orleans, actually more of a crossroads and safer territory and waterways, and a little bit higher to the north. But it got scratched because Bienville had property in what is now called New Orleans, which I shared earlier today. And of course, this is a word that I just learned in 2017, that New Orleans is Bologna, a place of languages or place of many languages. And I think that, the language piece for the Homa, most are speaking, the elders now, not so many young people are speaking a Homa French, which is a 17th century colonial French that linguists say is mixed with a Muskogee sentence structure. So it's really unique. But there is an effort by the Homa Language Project that are trying to kind of pull the ancient language up, and also knowing that culture and language is something that is constantly in flux. So it's, I'm not deeply involved in that project, but check it out because it's really great, and it's being done on such a community effort. But I think that just thinking back to the reading that I shared and to thinking about how land, how land is like owned, which is a really interesting concept, real estate in general, but just how there's been this history of extraction that goes back to the beaver, really. Because when the explorers were coming in, they like wanted the furs. That was the big money piece. And then how furs turns to forest and then goes back to furs, and then how the plantation economy also plays in with all of that. This is also part of that series. I just have recently, how you know your history is always an interesting journey. And I had this firsthand person, my grandmother, who was like giving me the deep download in real time. My mother's people are some of the earliest colonizers to the Louisiana Territory going back to the 1700s, and I'm just kind of uncovering this part of my ancestry through Ancestry.com. We made somebody spit into a tube, and, now we know all the secrets to my mom's side. No, I'm kidding, but it's kind of in that pathway in a way. But with the interesting piece that I've uncovered is that her early ancestor to the Louisiana Territory was a man by the name of Jacques Cantrell. Jacques Cantrell is why St. James Parish is named St. James Parish, which of course is in the heart of Cancer Alley. And he was the first commandant to that part of the territory when the Spanish had control, and was in direct relationship with Homa at that time. So I've been just thinking how it's interesting how my mother and my father's families have been in the same place, like in different times, and my parents found each other at the Deja Vu Lounge disco dancing in the 70s, so from St. James, and St. James Parish, of course, today is, not only is it in the heart of Cancer Alley, but it also is where the part of the Strategic Oil Reserve is held. And unfortunately, there was this huge accident of acid that spilled in St. James. So, these kinds of vulnerabilities that are all around us. And I'm just going to flip through some of these images here. This image is probably one of my most famous images, which was kind of funny, because it's not funny, but in 2004, this was just a tiny tropical storm. But when Katrina hit, this became like the iconic image. But like, we could use this image for every other year since that time, or before that time even, and I think that most of my adult life, I have been traumatized and also wanting to advocate for us to move to higher ground. And the older I get, the more I'm just like, calm down. You can't run from climate change. And also that, this place has been hyper manipulated. Nature does not create straight lines. This whole levee infrastructure and, the loss that's happened, which is crazy to think that what took Mother Nature 8,000 to 5,000 years to create, it's taken man 80 to 100 years to get to a point where we're like, the coastal master plan is like, we have these tools in the toolbox. It's like, yes, but, we have this time thing that we're up against, and also like what's happening just on a planetary scale right now that has left so many communities in vulnerable situations. We've been, this is like the life of the red zone map. But we've been thinking about I think that it often gets kind of portrayed as like, this is a wasteland if it goes underwater. But I've been thinking more and more how access to water, and access to the estuaries has really been so key to our survival. It was really heartbreaking last year. Folks have been trying to lift their houses for so many years to prepare to mitigate with sea level rise and with storm surge. And of course, folks came home to their homes blown to bits. And I think that, I've documented and watched these once kids, now grown adults, live through this cycle of storms where every couple of years, it's very normal for the water to wash in. I mean, we all in this room probably have gotten really kind of numb to the storms. I think that I always want to call it a storm because it felt like a never-ending 3-month hurricane. But when the BP drilling disaster happened in 2010, and they could not stop the oil from leaking out for almost 3 months, that was a really terrifying moment. And, to watch as these vessels of opportunity, as they called them, were signed up, were fishermen, who were trawling a couple weeks before, were suddenly putting these oil booms and taking these 3-hour classes to clean up oil waste. And I don't think that we're any safer now than we were then. Just shout out to one of my mentors, friends, guide, Monique Verdin, who so much of the work that I've done in my life is because this man woke up at sunrise with me and let me sleep on the bow of his boat and told me so many stories about this beautiful place and also all of its challenges. I just want to check time because we're gonna kind of, okay. So this is another elder, another dear friend and teacher, Auntie Vivian Hotard. And her and my grandmother were very good friends and neighbors. And in 2017, Vivian said, Monique, you have to take me to Bombay. And I was like, Vivian, you don't want to go. I had just gone the week before. And I had heard stories about this community, all my life. I'm from Vivian, where she grew up. And Bombay is where oil and gas was first, the first wells were put in coastal Louisiana, were put down the Humboldt Canal. Humboldt Oil Canal seems like an oxymoron of a name, but, this is, and of course, again, like nature does not create straight lines, so all of this, over 10,000 miles of canals that have been cut through our marshlands since the 1930s. But I brought her there and she would tell stories about being a kid and how fascinating it was, to see the derricks come in and how they would go climb on them like jungle gyms, and then how essentially they were run off of their land and how these spills happened and how there were these blowouts that would be flaring in their backyards. And no one lives in Bombay anymore. It's just crisscrossed with pipelines and there's nothing there. When I got got there, we drove as far as the road would let us drive, and she just got out and like stood there and was like, "This is our land," which is like, is still home for her, even though nothing was familiar. And it's been in the news quite a bit over the last couple of years, but the community of Ile de Jean Charles is facing, I bring up Vivian's story and that, her family was forced to move, and that was really in like the 40s when the folks were like getting out or having to get out, making the decision to leave. And of course, the Great Migration from the coast has been something that's been happening for quite some time, and we're seeing it in different ways. What I think is really weird about this time is that the places that are becoming more and more vulnerable are also the places that are becoming more and more desirable. So whether you're inside Orleans Parish, where, the regular person who, is middle class can't really afford to live there anymore unless you have a very unique situation. Or, folks who are at the ends of the bayous, like where I'm at in St. Bernard Parish, it was already starting before Katrina, but now, there's no families at the ends of the road, there's no old people, there's no children, there's no school buses, there's no schools, there's no stores. There are a lot of camps with people who have a lot of money, who go there a couple of times a year, who can take those risks to like lose everything in a storm and just go right back and build it again for their fancy boat to be parked there. And so, there's tons of literature you can read about that's out there in the world about the island. But I think that, this fear that they just want to get us out is very real. And to see what's happening at the ends of the bayous is really shocking in this time when, we're also being advised to retreat from the coast. And again, like, you can't run from climate change. And I said this earlier in the Q&A session, just that you take people away from the bayou, you're literally taking them away from their ability to feed themselves and to feed their families. You're taking them away from their kitchen table and their place of business and their place of worship and celebration as well. And so, there, of course, I think that there's been a lot of articles that have come out just recently about New Isle, but this was a first ever federally funded climate mitigation project, which, has been taken out of the hands of people and has been part of this bureaucracy. And, it is what many communities are facing, that there are not a lot of resources, and there are a lot of folks that live along coastlines. And so I think that, Ile de Jean Charles got kind of put out into the media as if it's just one community. And when you really look across the entire coast, there are so many communities that are facing these same challenges and questioning where to go, how to retreat and return, how to remain and reclaim, or do we move? And what does that look like? And nobody wants to move, really. And I just want to share a couple of these kind of new projects, which are also, there's plenty of news out there. And right now, the new coastal master plan is out for review and comment period. But these are sediment diversions, freshwater sediment diversions. So, everyone agrees that you can't restore the coast of South Louisiana if you don't reconnect the river to the wetlands. And because of the BP spill in 2010, there are real dollars to put forward these projects. Now, these are two very big kind of cuts that are going to happen in the river. And fishermen are freaking out. Communities are really freaking out because this is going to be turning these estuaries that are, saltwater, brackish saltwater, and in many cases, especially in St. Bernard Parish, they're all oyster beds that they're going to flood with this fresh water. And, You talk to some scientists, they're like, this is the best plan we got. You talk to other people, they're like, we're out of time to be putting these big diversions so far south where nobody is. What we need to be doing is be putting more freshwater diversions, smaller diversions further north around healthy wetlands, so we have a chance of saving and of continuing to have healthy systems. My Louisiana Love was mentioned. It's hopefully in your library. If not, I have to get a copy. Okay, cool. It's in your library. Sometimes PBS lets you stream it for free, and sometimes they take it off. I don't know. They never tell us why. I'm just going to talk about a couple of projects because I think that life is weird, and if you like, the road can take you in so many directions, and so my Louisiana Love came out. I was like, I'm never collaborating with anybody ever again after working in this deep relationship with my best friend for years, and then I worked on Cry You One with like 20 people. And it was a theater project that was 1.5 miles per session. That was part storytelling, part performance, part eco experience. It was weird. Gary LaFleur came and represented in the rain. It was awesome. And there's also more. There's a really great website, cryou1.com, which has interviews and also samples of the work and a little mini documentary about the work. And then our book, Return to Yakushito, which will be sold outside, which is kind of our newest project, through the Neighborhood Story Project, and elders, and say who I had to photograph of, and his wife, Jane, their granddaughter, Allison, T. Mayhart, who's a homeland historian, and then collaborators like Ryan Raymond, Bruce Jackson, Kathy Randalls, and Nick Slide, who are all amazing performers and directors and sweet humans. Another really awesome project that I'm excited about right now is helping to support the Oklahoma Ikish Polo Network. This is my friend, Dr. Tammy Greer, one of the most amazing hardcore women, homo women that I know, who stewards this medicine wheel garden at the University of Southern Mississippi. And we have been working with this network of Indigenous gardeners to really support each other in different ways, sharing medicine, moving some of the plants that are in coastal territories to higher grounds, and really figuring out food and medicine sovereignty systems of support. Shayna was pointing out the garfish scale earrings that I have tonight, and if anyone would like some, they were made by this beautiful, amazing elder, a friend of mine, Janie Lester, and this photograph was taken of her just earlier this year, and of course this is her home that's totally demolished from Ida, and of course the background, another one of these USGS maps, and she's smiling in this image, which is kind of weird, but I think it also is like the truth of the matter, where it's like, this is where we're at, and she's had a really rough year, not only losing her home, but also her family has just had a lot of challenges, and she's still not home. I mean, there's this little baby FEMA trailer, and she's trying to figure out a way to get back home, but she makes these beautiful garfish earrings, and if you'd like some, I have them for sale, I'll give that to her. We participated in a project, this Big River Continuum project, and I can't say the names, but this is the name in Ojibwe, and Tupukache is the word in Homa, which means the sound the river makes rushing down. And so we had a bunch of collaborators, Ojibwe folk, as well as Homa and other indigenous folks from the Delta collaborating. And I'll just end here. I have one more slide, but this is at the Contemporary Art Center in New Orleans right now. There's a H2O project, exhibition about water, and there's a lot of indigenous folks from all over the nation who are sharing their work there. But with some of my collaborators, Mondo Pizarro and Jeff Becker, We have a project called Invisible Rivers that we're actively working on, and we have a piece of infrastructure called the Float Lab. This was in its very primitive stage. There's been a lot of work that's happened since then. The idea is that this is a vessel that can be activated both on land or on water. It can be used as an exhibition space, a performance space, or a real laboratory. So we're working directly with a K-12 curriculum building organization called Ripple Effect on what they teach water literacy. So this is a really interesting and fun and new project, and we'll be in residency at the CAC throughout the year. So if you want to come to the city and float with us, we'd love that. And then I'm just going to leave these here because this is probably like some of the most boring meetings that are happening, but also like fascinating at the same time. And I think, you know, so often in my life, I found myself in rooms where I'm like, oh, there's like these people who sit on this board who make these decisions that affect millions and millions of people. And how that plays out, whether it's like a Shell, you know, board meeting or Credit Suisse board meeting or the, you know, the CPRA and the Coast Protection Restoration Authority. But this is a public comment period and community meetings, and so, you know, if you're interested in this, I just wanted to share because I think that it is really important for us to be informed and to inform our community around us, because these are decisions that are being made now that will have generational consequences. And I've just been trying to frame my perspective and thinking like, what if I made decisions on like a 2-year, a 20-year, and a 200-year scale? How different maybe those might be. So yeah, I'll just challenge you all to, you know, go forward and question your decision making in those time scales too, or whatever feels good for you or comfortable for you. I mean, sometimes I can't see beyond, you know, the next hour, but I think time is a really funny thing, and I think that this time that we're in, with all the land is sinking, the oil is coming, you know, the water is rising, that there's something that we're all being forced to face, and we have to be honest about where we are and how we got here. And I don't have the answers, but I think that collectively, you know, we deserve to have healthy air and clean water and safe places to be. And we didn't just end up here by default. And also we can't point fingers, but we can tell truths. So I'll just close it there, and I don't know how much time we have.
You just have a few questions.
Okay, great.
I think I'd love to cover a couple of questions. Also, it's interesting your book is for sale outside, as well, as I say beforehand. So, I don't know if there's a lot of questions, but if anybody has a question, you can come on down.
Or you can just shout it out.
I had this today where nobody wanted to go first, and then all of a sudden I had to turn off the questions because it went so long once people started asking. So who has the guts to go first?
Thank you for your talk. What is the status of the recovery of the Homa language? And I have a student, a homeless student, who gave or reprinted a really creative essay, Homa creation. And you studied that before.
So where the Homa language is in its recreation, I'm not 100% sure. I do know that this community of mostly young people have been coming together and also working with some other Muskogee speakers and trying to recreate and coming to consensus through this collaborative process, which is really interesting, and bringing them together in a really unique way. It's been a bit elementary, and now they're going deeper into like figuring out grammar and how you would write something yeah, so I'm not 100% sure there, but I can connect you with those folks. And in regards to the Homa creation story, it's I've kind of been, Gary LaFleur would probably geek out about like the evolution of crawfish or something on us, so maybe some other time you can download for me. But the crawfish, I think that they're such an interesting creature in that, with other southeastern nations, there's the belief that it's the crawfish that we have to give thanks to for actually being the creature that built the land. Before, when the world was nothing but water, it was the crawfish that went down and started building the land. What's fascinating about the crawfish is that they live both on land and in water. I think that also the fact that they have to get really vulnerable and shed their skin and be soft in order to grow. Like there's some deep metaphor there about life and survival. And I also think that it's kind of fascinating that this creation story also coincides with Mississippian mound builders and the mystery and the cosmology, and that mountains are thought of as being these kind of in between, kind of these connectors between the sky world and the underworld. So yeah, the crawfish, the creation story, planetary evolution. Google blue crawfish molting and it will blow your mind. When I have like a bad day, I like go to that. Just because like, okay, just but that's all I know. We're trying to figure out more. I'm working with Dr. Greer right now on a Library of Congress grant where we're interviewing all of these tribal artisans and storytellers. So we're looking forward to meeting with Greyhawk Perkins soon, and we're hoping to get his crawfish creation story download. So stay tuned.
Any other questions? I do. I have a question, and it's more so with the photographs. What got you interested in documenting like Louisiana culture and like the land for the Native American tribes within photography?
Yeah, I'm not really sure why I was like camera. I graduated from high school, I've always been a person who like tried to cut corners and then always had to do things like 3 times over whenever I was trying to get ahead of myself. And so I like skipped this art class that taught you about photography when I was in high school. And then after I graduated from high school, I went back to my high school and was like, can I get one of those 35mm cameras to like learn how to use it? And then I had to like teach myself and find people. And I was kind of just like that practice, especially with film, is different than with digital because you're seeing that, right? You have that immediate gratification. And I think that at that time in my life, I was just trying to move, I was moving slower and then I was capturing and trying to like understand where I was. And so then, you take these photographs and then you end up in a dark room by yourself for like hours. And I think that meditation was really just kind of fueled me to do it more, to be really honest. I don't take a whole lot of pictures these days. I mean, I do with my iPhone, but I just got a new medium, well, it's an old camera, but it's a medium format film camera, so I'm relearning how to be a photographer and move slow.
Just yesterday, really nothing against her name, Conference, and it's a little bit really a name. But it's in Lake Charles Casino, and all these liquid natural gas executives there. We're going to build out 12 natural gas terminals. And one of the protesters there in Travis Garber, and he used to live on Isle the Jean. And now he lives in Lake Charles, and he's about to be able he's going to lose his ability to fit, he believes. one of those terminals would be 200 feet from his house. And, at the protest, there were a diverse number of people. You wouldn't expect to see them together, but this thing brought them together. So how do you see that amount of power, $44 billion investment, that's always a big thing, right? But we're always promised some kind of golden opportunity afterwards, but it doesn't seem to pan out. But what is the force that would counteract that? How do we create a movement that would change things?
I mean, that's the golden nugget question. No, I mean, I think that, unfortunately, disaster forces us to learn lessons, and sometimes we remember them and sometimes we quickly forget them. And I think that, being in a place like Louisiana where we know we've been promised the golden nugget since the oil and gas came to town, and look at where our people are at. I mean, we got like the worst public education system, our quality of life, in St. Bernard Parish, we have some of the worst air quality in the nation because of sulfur dioxide. Our coast is disappearing, our people can't get insurance, but I think that there's been a bit of like brainwashing, and I think when we think about this legacy of land and land ownership and how it goes from like one kind of good old boy system to the next, and right now when we're talking transitions and how we're talking about solar, but it's like, well, is that going to be like the same system? There's going to be these big corporations that are not even invested here. They're like based out of who knows where, who are just using us and our land and our lives and our way of life. And I think that there's like some sort of system, like we need it's not just about systems change, it's about like a value shift and recognizing what really matters. And that's why I'm like kind of grateful that I've been through hurricanes in my life, because those are the moments where I'm suddenly like looking people in the eyes and like, oh my gosh, do you know where your water's coming from? Like, how are we gonna like get through this? Especially when you don't have those like conveniences of the lights being easily turned on. So, I mean, I think that we have to recognize like what really matters. And at this moment, it's kind of hard. A friend of mine told me, actually, my not-neighbor friend, Jacob Rosenzweig, one day, I was just like, oh God, like, what does it matter? We're driving around, like, talking about South Louisiana. And he said to me, like, Monique, we're working in geological time. And I think that when we're thinking about a shift from the industrial age to whatever is next, we really need to remember what really matters. And, it's water, it's community, it's good food, all those things that we Louisianians are so in love with and that make us who we are, but also it's in such a fragile state. So I think, it's really reframing like what wealth is. Is it dollars? Is it like having a big fancy house? Or is it like, having a healthy life that isn't coming at, your privilege and pleasure isn't coming at somebody's expense and loss, which I think is what, people like Ponisha, even broken is like paradise. You get there and it's like, I don't want to leave, the bounty is there, the beauty is all around. Yeah, sorry, I don't have an answer for that. I think there's one more question and then.
Yes, so in regards to, meeting these people and talking to them, all that, I was just reading a paper the other day about a entire little town out in Hawaii that you really have to go to get to completely like that. It was similar before. How do the people in these communities view moving and facing the idea that one day their entire community might be wiped out and they might have to? Like, what are you hearing from them that they're saying, oh, where are we gonna go? What's gonna happen? Because, as you said, it's either one of these storms or oil companies that have pushed them out. So what are you hearing in regards to that?
They don't want to go. They don't even want to talk about it most of the time. You know, I think that we very much so are like, put the blinders on and just get back to work. Everybody needs to go back to normal, you know, and that's becoming harder and harder. And I think that we need spaces where we can have real conversations, not community meetings where you have a board of people who have already made the decisions who are coming to the people, like, but we don't have those spaces. You know, we have these spaces where we got 3 minutes to basically like be like, please save me, you know, and so, you know, and I think that community needs to be making those decisions, but also like we don't have enough time to save all of South Louisiana, you know, but also at the same time, where are you gonna go? You know, what are you gonna do? Who are you gonna know? Are you gonna be accepted? We saw like after Katrina how people in Houston were like not welcoming, you know, evacuees. And I think that this kind of migration of the coast, it'll pulse, right? Like it already is. I'm sure that there's been a lot of people from down the bayou who have moved either to Homa or are coming up to Thibodaux or are gonna go, you know, so I think that's something that is happening, but we're not really like planning for that, you know? And then you have where like, they'll give you a loan to go build a house in a flood zone, but can you pay for the insurance and can you take, you know, all of these things where it's like, oh, you know. So, yeah, I think that, again, just to go back to the education piece, I think it's really, really important for, you know, young people, for the institution, for the university, for the elementary schools to be like talking about it, not in a scary way, but just in a real way, like this is how dynamic Delta works. And this Delta is not really dynamic right now because we've been kind of hyper managing it for economic gain, and it's come with this tremendous loss and generational consequences. But all that being said, I think that the nature is incredibly magical and like has this intelligence that we don't even know. And if you let it do what it's supposed to do, it'll do it. You just gotta respect it. So, thank you. I'll close there. I think that's a good way to close. Thanks for your questions. Thanks for being here.
Thank you all for coming.
I have garter skills.
And Garfish skill earrings will stay on the front, books in the back.
It's like Indian market.
Also, Aurora, come on down.
Aurora, congratulations.
Thank you so much.